everyone. Welcome to our latest episode of Better Humans at Work. I'm thrilled to be joined today by Heather Holland, the Chief People, Talent, and Diversity Curator of the Holland Collective. The Holland Collective builds capability through speaking engagements and curating inclusion and talent experiences for a variety of audiences. Heather partners with clients to curate custom workplace experiences that helps clients solve their most complex people and organizational matters while simultaneously partnering to create healthy workplace cultures where people and their talents thrive and flourish. Thank you so much for joining us today, Heather.
Good morning, Dr. V. Thank you for having me. I'm just excited to be here and have a good conversation.
Me too. And now Heather and I, we had the pleasure of meeting out in Chicago. I was out there for a conference, and she was so kind to come to my party. We had a little Mattingly Solutions
Yeah.
soiree, and Heather, I was so excited to meet you, just in general, but also because you are the head of DEI at SHRM Chicago. Is that correct?
Yes, Chicago Sherm. And that's
Mm-hmm.
actually, we got connected through that. And then we had a chance to meet in person. So I've leading Chicago Sherm's diversity efforts. We're refreshing our diversity efforts and we'll very shortly be kind of putting out the call to action to invite people in to kind of help continue on. The Chicago Sherm has actually been around for 70 years. So to
Oh,
help
wow.
continue building on the um the organization's efforts toward DEI.
And I'll be excited to watch your journey as leading the DEI at Chicago SHRM. I know Pittsburgh. We call it PHRA, the Pittsburgh Human Resource Association, but
Hmm.
it's the subsidiary of SHRM. We don't have a DEI person, and Pittsburgh needs more DEI. So I'll be curious to see what you do and see if we can maybe replicate some of your work out here in the Berg.
Absolutely. I think that's part of the longer term goal, and maybe even short term, is definitely to be a resource to Chicago SHRM's members, which are at least headquartered in Chicago. They may have assets or facilities elsewhere, but also to partner with other SHRM chapters, because we know many of the smaller chapters, for example, may not have a full staff or even have a diversity kind of director or someone leading the way. So I think it's definitely that's the name of the game in the space anyway, is to partner and collaborate and learning from one another. Um,
Absolutely. I can't agree more. I can't agree more.
so
Well,
absolutely.
so after we met, I was really happy that we followed up and had a couple of virtual coffee calls. And something I was really intrigued about your work, Heather, is what you do with talent. And
Mhm.
something I've always said, and what the name of today's episode is good DEI is just good talent. It's just good
Yes.
talent work. It's fair systems. It's making sure the right people are getting in the right positions and making sure you're nurturing them along the way. But I'm not a talent expert. I'm an organizational psychologist. So, can you kind of educate our audience on how do you define talent? What is talent and what's its role within an organizational context?
Good question. Because and talent has so many different aspects. So I'll try to hit the ones that kind of resonate or where I think there are key areas to focus. Because one, I look at myself as talent. And if
Mm.
you kind of look at yourself as a commodity, more or less, each of us is talent. We're talent to our respective organizations. So what is your sort of own accountability in taking control of your own talent path? And that's where you get into the conversation around career development and sort of taking the way, but who also teaches you how to kind of create your own career path. And we'll come back to that in a moment. So there's kind of an inside out approach. So that's kind of me as the talent, and me taking control of my own sort of development or career as the talent itself. So within an organization, talent runs the life cycle. So from the time you enter the organization to the time you leave that particular organization, there's a talent life cycle. You onboard, recruit, promotion, whether that be or laterals. So what organizational kind of what makes the organization, or what's conducive in the organization, your talent thrive and flourish? And it's a two-way street. I think for a long time it was viewed as a one-way street, where it was the organization's or a company's responsibility to develop me, to promote me, for is all my manager's responsibility. Well, most leaders, it's that conversation again about leadership. How do I know what you want to do and how I can help you get there if you don't tell me?
Yeah.
So I think there is, there's things like the promotion. Are the promotional and the development opportunities? What's the succession planning? And those are tools that enable talent. But I think is, especially more so now, where we are in 2024, I really think it's incumbent. I think the onus is on each individual talent or the person to lead the way, to say, here's what I really want and need. Because it may not always be the sort of traditional path. You may not want to follow whatever that traditional path is for your particular function.
I love that concept. Talent is a two-way relationship. So the way that me and Mattingly Solutions talks about allyship is very similar. So you cannot ally alone. There's no such thing as allying alone. You have to be in a two-way partnership, two-way relationship with the person or the group that you're trying to be an ally for. And there's an onus of responsibility that falls on the partner, is what I can call the ally and the partner. So I think about allies that I've worked with, and they gave me an opportunity. Well, it was the right opportunity because they knew what I was looking for. They knew what I was capable of doing. And then I stepped up to that opportunity and tried to hit it out of the park because, I was getting this opportunity, right? So it's a two-way relationship. And I feel like sometimes in the talent world, we have a lot of entitlement of employees and candidates. And I think it's a good reminder that we all have a role to play, just as we all have a role to play when it comes to allyship as well.
Absolutely. And I think that organizations, what is your organizational profile or personality? Really, how do you describe your culture? And that's an important piece in the recruitment, attraction, and retention of your talent, because I think you have to be, tell me the good things, tell me the pros and the cons, because you also have to be realistic about what your culture and your environment is, and communicate that upfront and honestly to talent, and then let them make the decision. So, for example, when I worked in energy, you work in oil and gas pipelines, an industry that is traditionally, especially you talk about pipelines, not so much utilities, an industry that's not traditionally and still not diverse when we think of gender, race, ethnicity. So when you're trying to increase or even just include in the workforce, we had to do a lot of work around, okay, what makes these types of jobs attractive? Yes, we need people, but it's not like you just have the name recognition. People are going to find out about the jobs. So yes, they paid well. Sometimes they were in small towns, maybe where you had to live within a certain 30-minute radius of the compressor station if you were a technician, for example. And if you needed to live in a town that puts you an hour outside of Chicago, and in particular if you're from a diverse background, whether you may be for example Asian, and there's not an Asian community nearby, that's something that you want to consider, because if you don't mention that, and some of what we kind of work to do was laying out what are the characteristics of the nature of the job, but what also are those external environmental factors that have an impact on you at work. Because when you're at work, you like the job, but if you're relocating and your family comes with you, what type of community are they able to establish? And those are important factors to consider as part of the sort of total package, and communicate upfront and
I think
often.
I think about what you're saying. It makes me think about, and I forget the name of the theory. That's how far away I am from grad school. But there's this theory of all the a systems theory, right? So
Yes.
there's the
Yep.
individual, and then there's the team, and there's the organization, and there's an
Yep.
environment, there's a society. And so, like, doing talent well and doing DEI well, you need to keep in mind all of those factors. It's not just the individual, it's not just the organization. I did want to ask a clarifying question. So when
Yes.
you were explaining what talent was, um, I usually refer to that as the employee life cycle. Like, what's the
Mhm.
difference between talent and the employee life cycle?
I think of the employee life cycle is what's the sort of life cycle you have, or the if you think of a circle, where you start and the kind of where you become full circle at that particular organization. So it may start with some of the typical terms of like recruiting, and there's work that should be done prior to recruiting, but that's more typical. You onboard, and then you go through the organization, and you may be promoted and go up, or you may take a lateral move, and then at some point you go up or out the organization, essentially. And leaving the organization isn't necessarily always a bad thing.
Yeah.
I think a good analogy, the employee life cycle is your tenure and how you progress through an organization, and whatever time it takes you to progress through an organization.
And whereas
And when
talent's
it's
like the
down,
whole gamut, and it's also that, as you said before, like the individual, but also the process.
yes, the individual and the process. And what was the second part of your question? The difference between employee life cycle and
Oh, and talent. You answered it.
and talent. Oh yeah,
You answered. You nailed it.
yeah. Talent is
Um,
that employee life cycle. I mean, I think it's your people. Your people are your talent. So it's a key factor in that employee life cycle.
Got it. Got it.
And there's planning that I look at it too. There are processes that happen around the person, those sort of talent processes. Because how are you planning for the future of your talent if you know you have X% attrition, or you're going to have retirements, or you're going to have some type of turnover? Where are you planning for your talent?
Yeah.
In a lot of cases, is not a surprise, or shouldn't be a surprise.
Yeah, and you just absolutely set me up for my next question, because I was going to ask, going to like the title of today's conversation, good DEI is just good talent. And so, what is that overlay of DEI like onto talent? And even just what you were saying about how, planning what comes next and planning from a workforce standpoint, that's good talent. But if you look at demographics on top of that, then you're able to see, oh, we have some gaps here. We don't have any women in our pipeline. We have no people of color coming up through this organization, right? And so can you talk a little bit about, and I love that you really do sit in both seats, right? Talent
Yeah.
and DEI. So like, how do they play into each other? How do they help each other?
They are, to me, they're tied together. They are married together. What is the makeup of, what are the demographics or the makeup of your workforce? I mean, that's the aspect of diversity. Some of those physical aspects. What's your gender makeup? What's your racial or ethnic makeup? What generations? What's the kind of gender makeup? Whether there's veterans and LGBTQ status, but also, okay, what about those things that are not sort of those, I don't want to say typical, but those physical dimensions of diversity? What about, for example, diversity of experience? If you're in a particular industry, if you're in the financial industry, do you always recruit only from, or what's the makeup of your team that does not have a financial background? Because that the varying layers of diversity are important, because on one hand, I argue that it's fairly easier, it's easier to recruit in diverse talent, but can you attract and more importantly, retain that diverse talent? And do you see that diverse talent move throughout the organization and in those senior leadership ranks? And that's typically where it's problematic, because I think too
Mm.
many companies focus their efforts on early talent. And then that mid to senior level talent tends to get overlooked. But there's also being realistic and going back to the point about me taking control of my own sort of talent, and being aware, if you want to get to that director level and above, there's only so many positions at a particular company. So more than like being realistic about, is that attainable where I'm at, or do I need to move on? The same question should be asked internally by the leadership team. So what do you do? And I think you have to be intentional about how do you attract and retain diverse talent. And that circling back to the conversation about, what is it that I want? What is it that I'm looking for? What's my leadership style? And do I fit within this organization? I think that's a conversation that both parties should ask.
And it's interesting because there's been a few jobs I've had or friends have had
Mm-hmm.
where the manager, and excellent manager in these cases, has said, I want to develop you even if it means developing you out the door.
Yep.
Because they're still going to get better work from me as someone who's being developed, even if I end up leaving, than trying to say I need to stay forever and then having no path for me. But I did want to go back to something you said previously when you were talking about the financial industry. And like, it's interesting because you look at job postings in any industry, it's not just finance, any industry. The very first bullet point is X years of experience working in this industry, right?
Yes.
But if we took a more DEI lens to talent, there's two benefits of recruiting outside an industry. One is you're expanding the pool. Oh my gosh, like how much bigger of a pool will you have if you take away the industry barrier? And so it's just practical. And then secondly, innovation. We talk about diversity of thought and the benefits of diversity, but research shows again and again that more diverse teams, including what you said, it's not just age, gender, sexual orientation, right? Like people coming from another industry, they're going to bring a whole new perspective that is going to, increase the productivity and innovation and efficiency of their team, as opposed to having yet another cog in the wheel who've been in the same industry for years and years and years. And so that's an example of how DEI supports talent. How does talent support DEI?
I think talent supports DEI, quite well. When you talk about DEI and the different layers, and just like the title, in essence, talent is DEI. Whether are we talking inclusive leadership? Let's say I'm leading a team of professionals across the globe. Me as that leader, yes, I have my leadership style, but also how do I make sure that my team feels included, that I also adapt my leadership styles, not always my team adapting to me, but how do you, that speaks to your development. Are you tapping into your talent and what makes them, or do you know what makes them thrive? How will they flourish? Where will they flourish? What part of the organization? And like you said, your a prior leader told you, even if, I think that's also the sign of a good leader, if that means I am developing you out of the organization. My whole goal as a leader, and especially as an inclusive leader, is to help you be your best self. Like that's one of the things, to help people and their talents, the people and their talents thrive and flourish.
And another analogy, like I've said this before, but good leadership is inclusive leadership. A good leader is going to make their followers and their subordinates thrive. Like that's it, and so I love that. I could talk about this all day. But So first off, I did want to share a little fangirl moment. So Susan Borg, Esquire, two of my favorite experts together. So thanks for the call out, Susan. And if you're tuning in live like Susan is, feel free to put a comment in the chat, question for us. If you have any questions, we can answer those live. We only have a few more minutes left with y'all. So get those questions out there. Otherwise, you're going to miss your live stream opportunity. But as we start, what's that?
The time has flown by.
I know.
Probably all day.
That's what I knew this would be fun. You're having fun when time flies by. But as we, get to the end of our conversation, Heather, for those watching out there, what would be 3 tips you have for either leveraging talent for DEI or DEI for talent? But, for those who want to use talent to make life better in the workplace, what recommendations do you have for our listeners?
I'll start with, this is probably one takeaway or for individuals, because I think a lot of times talent is sort of packaged in terms of what the organization can do or should do. So if you are in the job market at your company, I love the term entrepreneur. Take on the concept of an entrepreneur. You are just like if you're sports fans, and I tend to be a sports fan, you are your own agent or your free agent. So what is your plan and what do you want to do? Take control of your career, build that path for yourself. And that path, it can be a dual path. In how do you sort of map out a career for yourself where you are, and don't get stuck with the confines of whatever the current development path. And how do you, because you're looking at, is one big path is your path, and that may be where you are, that may be somewhere else. So build that plan. Think of it as an entrepreneur, like a free agent. I see another takeaway. It's the and we've talked, that's the theme of the show. I was going to say the intersectionality, talent and DEI, and talent and leadership. Talent is, leadership, the one side of being a good leader and recognizing and tapping into your talent. I say especially your diverse talent, and be intentional about how you will seek out future diverse talent. There's, lots of people have sort of gotten this certification in as a diverse recruiter, but what does that really mean? Do you really recruit any differently? That's probably a whole nother side story. So the I guess to bring it back and summarize, that second key takeaway is talent and diversity. And I guess that could be 2 and 3, talent and leadership, the intersectionality of talent. And because to me, talent is the center of everything in the workplace. That's what fuels the individual. That's what fuels leaders. That's what talent is, what fuels diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Absolutely. And then for those HR professionals out there that maybe are more generalists or in benefits or just not in a talent role, but they want to be, like, what recommendation do you have for them?
Ooh, that's a good question. I'd say start where you are. If you're in that generalist role and is there a talent center of excellence? There's a couple, so there's like there's a couple of sort of talent functions, but I think the best place to get into talent is to start where you are. Be willing to kind of work with those people who are already in talent to say, I'd love to get in talent. Do you mind if I shadow you? Set up an introductory meeting, ask what they do, share what you'd like to get involved in, and then find out, how do you get involved in that particular organization? I think, just aside from recruiting, which is a piece of talent, I think most people get into talent by way of at some point being a generalist and then specializing. Some companies have the talent centers of excellence, and in most cases, you have to walk in the door with some level of talent experience.
Yeah. Thank you for all those. Just to quickly recap. So for individuals out there wanting to maximize their own talent, be an entrepreneur, build your own path, be your own free agent. I love how you said that. Secondly, remember that talent intersects with DEI and leadership. You need them all to do them well. You can't do DEI without leaders on board. You can't do good talent if you're not looking at, how your workforce is comprised. You're not maximizing the diversity of your various pools. And then finally, if you want to get involved in talent, whether you're in HR, maybe in a tangential field, start where you are and build from there. Find out who's doing that talent work. What projects can you get involved in? You gotta make that transition based on where you're at. There's no just jumping up to another role, right? You got to get that experience. And I think that goes back to number one of being an entrepreneur. So great pointers. I knew this would be really fun. Thank you. This has been a great conversation.
Yes, and the time went by so fast. I was thinking that we were only 10, 15 minutes in and we're already done. But thank you for having me. I enjoyed our discussion, and hopefully the information and tips help someone. I definitely get excited and passionate talking about talent. I think sometimes it's hard to speak generally, but when you help and you're working with someone one-on-one, it's a lot easier to kind of say, okay, here's that coaching. I'm a coach at heart, so that coaching comes into play.
So if someone wanted to bring you in to be their coach or be a speaker, Heather, what's the one best way people can get a hold of you?
Probably the easiest way is LinkedIn. And reach out on LinkedIn, and happy to chat more. And my LinkedIn has my website and other contact information to be a speaker or coach or consultant.
Excellent. And I look forward to collaborating with you.
Yes.
We're still figuring out what that next step will look like on a client or a speaking event or a conference, but this is not the last that you've seen of Heather and Dr. D. So.
It is not the last. This is the first of many.
The first of many.
Yes.
Well, thank you again, Heather, and thank you for all you do to help us be